And I think the technology was just a little too early when we did pitch it internally, and we just did not get much interest and uptake. And to his credit, Brendan Burns, who's my boss, was very encouraging to me. And he encouraged me to think about other ways to pursue this level of passion. And I got to talking to a few VC friends, and as soon as I said WebAssembly and next generation of cloud computing, I realized that we were onto something bigger than I had thought, and that people were actively looking into that space. You can probably imagine the awkward after work hours kind of thing where I'm like, hey, team, you know that idea we had about WebAssembly? Let's go start a company. I'm Matt Butcher, the CEO and co-founder of Fermyon.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Lampart, and today how Matt Butcher created the fastest path from your blinking cursor to a deployed app in less than 2 minutes. All this and more on Code Story. Matt Butcher was always intending to be a philosopher in the early days. His dad informed him at some point he would need to get a job, though. After he interviewed at a local utility company, he was thrust into learning the World Wide Web. He continued programming his way through college, getting his PhD in philosophy, but eventually moved solely into tech. He has contributed to multiple open source projects and was one of the original creators of Helm. Outside of tech, he's a coffee snob with more coffee tooling in his kitchen than plates or silverware. Matt and his team started to explore the things they couldn't do with their current tooling at Microsoft and landed on the power of WebAssembly. In attempting to speed up the startup time of servers and containers, alongside the rising popularity of serverless, he and his team stumbled onto something during a post-offsite dinner. This is the creation story of Fermyon.
Fermyon is pioneering the next wave of cloud computing, and that's the way we kind of articulate in a nutshell. The entire Fermyon team has worked in cloud for quite a while. And at some point we started to notice that there were some things we couldn't figure out clever and good ways to accomplish in cloud computing. And so we started to look for technologies that could help us do this better. And WebAssembly kind of bubbled right up to the top right away as a technology that really enabled a lot of use cases and features for the cloud that we couldn't figure out how to do with containers and virtual machines. So we've begun by building an open source tool called Spin that's designed and targeted for developers to be able to write these new kind of WebAssembly applications for the cloud. And then, late in October last year, we launched Fermyon Cloud, which is our hosted platform so that developers can quickly kind of run these applications, share them with their friends, and begin building cool applications. This is the kind of time when I wish, every one of the 10 of us who started this could be on here and give their own version of this story. Because it's just, you got 10 of us left Microsoft on the same day to start Fermyon. A lot of us came in through an acquisition into Microsoft, a company called Deis, which was very early in the Kubernetes space. We were building Helm, and we wrote the original version of the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes, and we attracted Microsoft's attention because we were doing this. Brendan Burns, who was the creator of Kubernetes, had recently hired on at Microsoft and was building the ideal Kubernetes team, was what they wanted to build, right? And I was we were fortunate enough at Deis to be considered desirable enough that we got acquired by Microsoft. And it, honestly, I've been through a number of acquisitions before. The Deis Microsoft acquisition was amazing. It was just fantastic. And my team at Deis became sort of like the open source containers team within Microsoft Azure. And our mandate was build cool stuff based on, container technology, Kubernetes, solve problems that were coming up in the community or through customers or even internally from other Azure teams, and then push as much as possible into the open source world, particularly to like Cloud Native Computing Foundation and other similar organizations, so that, in addition to solving problems, Microsoft could be a good citizen in the open source world. A bunch of us kind of got working on a wide variety of projects, ranging from Helm package manager for Kubernetes through a bunch of more experimental projects like Brigade and Draft and on into even some things that kind of started to move to the very boundaries of the container ecosystem like CNAB. And it was just fun. But along the way, because we had this kind of unprecedented level of access both to internal Azure teams like the Compute or the HoloLens or the .NET team, and access to customers and this like full-on, full send community engagement, we got to hear a lot of input and really got sort of like the frontline experience of what people were frustrated with. And sometimes we would hit upon something that a large number of people requested, but that we couldn't figure out how to do in containers or even figure out how to do in virtual machines. The startup time for a virtual machine tends to be clocked in at minutes. Startup time for containers tends to be clocked up in seconds. Yet we were seeing the rise of popularity of serverless kinds of infrastructure. Well, serverless functions in particular, right? Like Lambda and Azure functions and that whole, Google functions, that whole litany of compact code executable artifacts that you can kind of push up and have them execute per request. And developers are telling us, oh, we love functions as a service. I mean, there's some issues with it. We'd like a better developer experience. We'd like, these kinds of features. We'd like to not be locked into a vendor, but we like the developer experience. Meanwhile, the platform operators, and again, this was an excellent thing about being inside of Microsoft. The platform operators at the compute team are telling us, well, here's how it works. We have to pre-spin up this stuff and keep this warmed virtual machine image around, and it's expensive. And so we started hearing problems like these, right? And we started collecting these kinds of little nuggets of, desire or frustration or whatever these are nuggets of. And at some point, we decided to sit down and have a conversation about them. And so I remember very vividly this conversation because we had all flown into Vancouver Island to do our team on-site. And so we all got together, kind of took over a couple of hotel conference rooms, spent the day planning. It's a very exhausting process. And at the end of the day, we'd unwind by having dinner. And we're just kind of sitting around after dinner. The table's largely been cleared. We're finishing up our drinks and we're kind of exhausted. And you know how sometimes the bit just flips, right? And you go from sort of like this mode where you've been hyper engaged in this kind of analytic reasoning process of how are we going to schedule this stuff to this kind of free flowing creative mode. And I'm totally not attributing this in any way to the Canadian whiskey we were drinking. We kind of got into this mode where we were going like, what is the next wave of cloud computing? All along, we've been trying to shoehorn all of our problems into the patterns of virtual machines and containers, but maybe there's something else out there, some other undiscovered technology that if we plugged it in the cloud context would start solving these problems for us. And, the brainstorming session, we tossed out a couple of ideas, but we just decided, well, on our Friday afternoons when we're doing our research time, maybe we'll look around and see kind of what bubbles up to the surface. And it didn't take long for WebAssembly to be kind of that thing. So, a couple of us spent few Fridays here and there kind of researching it, playing around with it, finding some inspiration. I mean, it really did seem like a good fit. But then along came COVID and, we were a remote team already. And to some degree, I think that helped us a lot over teams that had to go from in-person to remote. But even so, once we were on lockdowns and things like that, the morale on the team really took a hit. And we decided we were going to just refocus our energy. Let's spend some time refocusing on the mental health of the team and a little less on the roadmap, and just kind of opened up a space. Kind of ended up putting us in an interesting creative space again. And you never really know what's going to kick you into the creative, what's going to flip the creative bit, right? But, people started to desire to do something that was going to be energizing. So it wasn't just avoiding work that was draining. It was like, can we get engaged in something that's going to be energizing? And so the whole team started playing around on Fridays with WebAssembly and what can we build? And then, Research Friday became Research Thursday and Friday, and the team really just dove all in, and we built some really cool technology previews. We built this system called Crustlet that could execute WebAssembly inside of Kubernetes. And, at the outcome of this, we're like, okay, well, let's pitch this, right? Surely Microsoft is going to love this. And I think the technology was just a little too early when we did pitch it internally, and we just did not get much interest and uptake. And to his credit, Brennan Burns, who's my boss, was very encouraging to me and said, you may actually be onto something. It's just not something that Microsoft is finding a lot of interest in right now. He encouraged me to think about other ways to pursue this level of passion. And I got to talking to a few VC friends. And as soon as I said WebAssembly and next generation of cloud computing, I realized that we were onto something bigger than I had thought, and that people were actively looking into that space to see who was doing what. You can probably imagine the awkward after work hours kind of thing where I'm like, hey, team, you know that idea we had about WebAssembly? Let's go start a company. And, we took a weekend to think about it, came back on Monday, and everybody's like, we are all in. And a couple weeks later, we turned in our notice at Microsoft, all 10 of us on the same day. I really feel bad for the HR person who had to process all of that. And we started Fermion. And then a month later, closed our Series Seed of investment, and we were just off and running.
So let's dive into the MVP then. So you left Microsoft, or you've built this, you pitched it, you're ready to jump out on your own and pursue it. Maybe the MVP is that one you just described, but maybe even a little bit further after you jumped out, that MVP you're going to go commercialize, right? Tell me about that. How long did it take you to build or make it so, right? If you've already kind of had Fermion tools prior to that, and what sort of tools did you use in that to make it come to life?
So I kind of think about it as if we had two waves of MVP after Fermion started its lifetime, right? After we got started. So on the first day that we launched Fermion, Radu and I kind of laid out to the team a vision for the very first thing we wanted to do. And it was, we want to prove to the world that WebAssembly is useful in a cloud context. And we want to do that by running our own web presence on top of a Fermion-built WebAssembly stack. We don't have to release any of this publicly, right? We just have to build it. So we kind of set out to do that. And this was actually turned out to be a really amazing way to galvanize the team, because it's a very straightforward mission, right? By February, we want to launch a website. And that means we need web server kinds of stuff. We need a way to serve files. And we want to have like killer, amazing, awesome performance. And so we all kind of got going on that. We built kind of platform that, if I were to be honest, I would say was, 50% code and 50% marshmallows and toothpicks to kind of hold it all together. It was like that 8th grade, build a house with marshmallow and toothpicks kind of thing, but it worked. And on February 7th of 2022, we launched a website. It was built entirely on Fermion WebAssembly's stack. I mean, including the fact that we wrote our own CMS system in Rust that compiles to WebAssembly, and it runs inside of a WebAssembly execution context, running, being scheduled but orchestrated by HashiCorp's Nomad orchestrator. And we were really proud of this whole kind of stack that we had put together in such a short period of time. But then, the second real challenge is, well, okay, it's well and good for us to be, exhibiting what we think we can do, but we've got to start building tooling that people are going to be able to use themselves, right? And be able to build their own applications. And at this point, we knew what it took us to develop the system. And we knew what easy parts were and what the hard parts were, with the hardest part really being that we needed a deployment model, but other hard parts being WebAssembly stacks are a little bit tricky to install the first time and a little bit tricky to manage. And so we said, all right, Docker did an excellent job of building a tool that got developers excited about building containers. And we know as developers that this is a pain point for us in WebAssembly. Let's build something sort of along the lines of the early Docker command line, but geared toward developers who want to build WebAssembly workloads. Only a few months later, we released the first version of Spin. And Spin is our open source developer tool for WebAssembly. And it makes it easy to scaffold out a new project and get it compiling and locally run it and test it. And that was kind of the first MVP. So we released Spin on March 31st for one and only reason. And that was that we were getting up to where we wanted to release it. And I'm like, we are not releasing this product on April Fool's Day. Whatever it takes to release it before April Fool's Day. I don't want anybody to think that this is like, Google Moon or one of those April Fool's jokes. So we got it out on March 31st, which I think was a Thursday or Friday or something like that. And, it's the end of a sprint. We were all exhausted, all kind of left for the weekend, came back on Monday, and there were, 1,100 GitHub stars or something on our project. And we're like, wait, what? Helm took a year and a half to get to 1,100 stars. What's going on? And discovered that we had sort of trended on Hacker News, and a number of people had really kind of found this project really interesting and engaging. And so it was like, it was a really rewarding way to get to the end of what was really our first MVP and say, okay, well, it's minimal and it's a product, but people are telling us that it's also viable. And that's really exciting, because I think you could get to the end of an MVP and discover that it's actually an MP with no V at all in it. So that was a really exciting moment. And from there, that kind of got the whole team rallied around. Okay, well, now that we've got something that's showing the first signs of success, sky's the limit. What do we do next?
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted VCSOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's VANTA.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com. How did you progress the product from that point and mature it? So everybody's stoked, you're getting the viable part, the good feedback from the market. How'd you progress it and mature it? And I think to wrap that in a box a little bit, what I'm curious about is how you built your roadmap and how you went about deciding, okay, this is the next most important thing to build or to address.
One thing that I feel very fortunate about, and the colleagues that have come along from Microsoft and the people who have joined since, is the sort of dedication to the idea that if we plan, and we plan really well, and we plan realistically, then execution is merely walking a path that's preset for you, right? Instead of having to, carve your way through a jungle, you're just following the path that you laid out. Really, at the point at which we had launched the website, we knew in February of 2022, we've got to have a developer tool. As an MVP, we know that this is going to scratch a couple of itches, but that it's going to leave people wanting a lot more features. We need to figure out what those features are. And the other thing we knew is it's one thing to show people how to locally develop and run, microservices and web application backends written in WebAssembly with that kind of function as a service feel. But, to be blunt, who cares if you can run a facsimile of a cloud service locally? The whole idea of the cloud service is that you have somewhere in the cloud to push that workload and then have it execute in a production-grade environment. We need to figure out how to continue moving Spin along and continue to add the features that people are asking for and continue to broaden the language support for Spin. And the second part was to build a cloud. We sat down and went, okay, well, RedMonk publishes his top 20 language rankings they publish the top language rankings every 6 months. I think it is 6-ish months. And the top 20 of those really kind of represent the lion's share of what programming languages people are using in production environment. Let's just say, for every language where there is a plausible WebAssembly story, let's say we want to go out after the top 20 languages in a year, and let's say, we want to be able to add backing data services like key value storage and features like domain mapping and things like that onto the Spin project, and we want to be able to do things with Redis and listen and publish and subscribe on queues. And we set out, a fairly ambitious roadmap that we knew will take us through the end of this first quarter of this year, as we've been kind of rolling out these features a few at a time. And then the second part was the cloud one, saying, okay, well, we know we need a production-style cloud environment where you can experience this kind of like, you write code in serverless functions model, much like you would with Lambda, but have it built into WebAssembly, and then deployed onto this cloud platform. And the whole experience, start to finish, is just easy and delightful for developers. Again, this was like the inspiration from Docker for us has always been, they made it so easy to be a developer and to care about infrastructure. Early Heroku, same thing. They made it so easy to be a developer and go, hey, I can do this, self-service deployment thing. And I think in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and I'm speaking as, someone who's played the platform engineer and the systems developer, we lost sight of that particular user group. We really lost sight of what the average developer experience was like in those environments. And so this was a chance to sort of get back to the basics of what makes a really profoundly good end-to-end developer experience. So for the entirety of 2022, we said, all right, we're going to identify one key user story. And we absolutely 100% must nail that one key user story. And the key user story was, as a developer, I can go from a blinking cursor to a deployed application in 2 minutes or less. But that was it. We were just like ruthlessly focused on that, because if we could solve the problem that we were hearing from developers through all of our Microsoft years, stretching back to the early days of Kubernetes, that was a big opening for us. And no, we don't see ourselves as competing with Kubernetes or solving this problem for Kubernetes. We just see ourselves as trying to find where the developers' needs are now and then kind of streamline their story. And really for us, I think along the way, we learned that the serverless functions world was really where developers want to be, right? Particularly, there's a whole utility class of computing and a whole microservice and web application backend pattern that works really well with serverless, but it's been gated by the fact that the existing technologies were slow. And they were slow because they were built on virtual machine technology or container technology, and consequently had to swallow kind of that slow startup cost. And that was one of the areas where WebAssembly really can shine. Our goal was to be able to do per request handling of around 100 milliseconds per request. And that would be from cold start to executing the first user instruction, 100 milliseconds. We're currently under 1 millisecond for that. And we just vastly underestimated how fast WebAssembly is if you pay attention to all the little knobs and dials and really tuned for your specific use case. So it has been really exciting to see that. I think we've closed in on telling the rudimentary story that we want, and having gone from an MVP with early spin all the way through this kind of open beta platform, Fermyon Cloud, that we launched in October.
So let's switch to team then. So you told me that a lot of people came over from Microsoft, right? And I get that's how part of that started, but I'm curious about that still, and also how you build your team today. What do you look for in those people to indicate that they're the winning horses to join you?
So I said that 10 of us left Microsoft and that we started with 11. So who's the mystery number 11, right? And that was Tim Enwall, who's a multi-time CEO, friend of mine, has been a mentor of mine for a long time. Years ago, I worked at one of his companies called Revolve. More recently, he had been involved at Misty Robotics, which is a really cool robotics company. He was the CEO of that. And after finishing up at Misty, he came on initially consulting with us and just kind of helping us find our footing and helping us get finances in order. And the more we worked together, the more Tim and I and Radu and Mikkel worked together, the more we realized we just love collaborating. A lot of the kind of early decisions we made about how we were going to hire and how we were going to build the team were informed by Tim's expertise. And one of the things that he said to us very, very early on, probably first week or two, was, we used to have very regimented hiring process that included having an organizational psychologist do our values interviews. And I kind of laughed. Yeah, that's interesting. And he said, well, this guy is great. Adam's great. We should bring in Adam and have him do a couple like lunch and learn kinds of sessions with the team on how to handle conflict and how to work on resolving problems rather than letting them fester, and and a number of kind of early organizational kinds of things. And I'm going, okay. For paying for an hour of external consultant time, that seems reasonable. From the end of the first session with Adam, I understood why Tim was enthusiastic. Adam presented material that was designed specifically to help us avoid a lot of the pitfalls that early startups do. You hit the storming period and personalities come into conflict, and research says that a number of startups fail right there. We didn't want to be that startup, right? And so these kind of early sessions with Adam were really oriented around, I know you've all worked together as a team before, but let's talk really bluntly and honestly about what are the ways that you can take feedback. When somebody needs to tell you did something wrong, what kinds of language do you use? And all of these things that, in hindsight, as I'm saying them now, are like, well, yeah, of course, giving somebody permission to give you blunt feedback, it seems like an obvious thing to do. But at the time, I realized I had never really done that before. And a lot of times we were kind of glossing over when things were irritating us. So it gave us a way to really sort of rethink how we could be a high functioning team by being a team that is excellent at communication internally, excellent at talking to each other, and then excellent at resolving conflict. When two people have a really good idea, they each have a really good idea, you really want to do the diligence to figure out which one is going to be the idea you go with. You don't want that conflict to turn into thrown toasters and, slammed computers and things like that. And so that ended up being really good. We ended up early on, we identified what we felt like were our core values: curiosity, humility, inclusivity, and passion. CHIP, we called them our CHIP values. And we realized that we didn't know how to interview for those things. How do you interview somebody for curiosity? So again, we contracted Adam and said, how do we interview for this? And then we said, well, wait a minute. The great thing about working with an organizational psychologist and someone who's really gifted and skilled in this is they learn to read people. And so he ended up starting our interview process. At this point, he works 30 hours a week for me on doing everything from continuing on this kind of training to helping us refine our interviewing process and understand the psychological impact of, say, economic downturns, and people, peers and friends getting laid off from other companies. Man, it's great to have someone there to say, hey, let's navigate this together and let's treat this as something that we should talk about and we should be honest with each other about and be maybe a little bit more vulnerable, but also in a proper work context. So Adam, I think, has been sort of our secret weapon as far as how we've done the hiring process here at Fermion. Spent a lot of time saying, okay, how do we do the right kind of technical interviews? How do we project out what kinds of hires we need to do? And how do we make those hires in a timely manner? But all of those, I think, are really sort of run of the mill. I think the thing that I learned from Tim and am happy to have reinforced daily with Adam's contributions is this idea that if you really truly care about a high functioning startup culture, you have to do a lot of legwork to do that communication part. And it really does behoove you to stick to values and figure out how to make values a real, actual part of culture, and one that you can start at the interview and identify the right people at the interview and then reinforce those values every day in the company.
Let's flip to scalability. And this will be interesting given the context of the product you're building. So I'm going to ask it like we haven't talked for the past 30 minutes. Did you build this to scale efficiently from day one? Or are you fighting this as you grow in any capacity?
I think people was the one that was the harder for us, right? When you start a company during pandemic where every office around is closed, one question that never comes up is, should we have an office? Or even, should we all live in the same city? And it turns out, at this point, Fermion, I think we've got people in 5 different continents that are working for Fermion. Working entirely virtually both has a lot of strengths and some surprising weaknesses. We were probably the first DevOps team, and well, I shouldn't say that. I like to think of us as potentially the first DevOps team ever that had 24/7 coverage with a DevOps team of 3, because we just so happened to be spread out around the globe such that, everybody was, that the time zones worked. We very quickly had to get good at asynchronous communication and start to learn how to not accidentally create silos where information was shared narrowly and not broadly. As we start building a marketing team, is the marketing team able to communicate with engineering in all the areas they want to communicate with engineering, and communicate in product to product in all the areas they want to communicate in product, but without getting completely overwhelmed by things that do not matter to them, like, what is this Rust error? Or, how do I install this compiler? And so we took a lot of time trying to figure out how to do Slack well. We started with using SharePoint for all of our kind of team communication stuff, and realized that was just not working for us, in spite of the fact that 10 of us were from Microsoft and used to it. We switched to Notion, figuring out the right balance of doing live calls and recording things, but only recording things that people wanted to hear about, and then taking meeting notes. And we ended up with a whole bunch of asynchronous processes that, if we had come up with all of them at once, would have felt overwhelming. But because we kind of learned our way into them, it has seemed to kind of settle into a pattern that feels normal and productive, but not onerous or burdensome. One place I worked in the past that was the most alienating thing I experienced there was I had a bad day and I didn't say anything in Slack and not a single person noticed or reached out or anything. And I, got up to leave my desk at the end of that day. And this was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or something. Got up at the end of that day and went, wow, I just feel so unsupported. And so I think, as we've gotten going with Fermyon, we tried to create environments where people could check in when their workday started and at least have a couple of touch points through the day, whether that's an in-person stand-up with the team that's time zone relevant to them, or just a couple of interactions on Slack when they can't get on a video call for some reason. That kind of way of building culture is both, good for where we are now, but also seems to be scaling up as we hire more people and hire people in different functions and in geographically sort of disparate locations. Compared to that, scaling technology-wise has been really easy because we're all a bunch of cloud engineers who are like, well, this is our bread and butter. We know how to scale. And, WebAssembly as a core technology is a very, very scalable, highly scalable technology. And for example, on an extra large virtual machine in AWS, if you were running containers, you can run maybe 30 to 40 containerized applications on that extra large VM. Open beta release, we were running 900 applications per extra large, and then we have gone up from there since then, and we're not actually sure what the upper bound is, but we think it's somewhere around 10,000. And so scalability on the tech side has been a much easier story for us.
Okay, so as you step out on the balcony and you look across all that you've built, what are you most proud of?
I am, and I do not want to understate the fact that I am really, really legitimately enthusiastic about the technology that we built. I think it is a really first-class technology that really will, over the next few years, shake up the way we think about cloud and ultimately, cut costs and improve performance and make more developers and more platform engineers happier people. I don't want to underplay all of that, but what I think I am most proud of is to work together on a team of passionate people who really and legitimately are not just super smart engineers and amazing marketing people, but people who are good to each other and who care deeply about the emotional well-being of their peers, about whether or not we can build a fun workplace, whether we can, insert levity to the day-to-day tasks and reduce frustration. That to me is the one thing. And, say, what are you most proud of? And honestly, I have to say, I can't say proud of that because pride sort of suggests that somehow I had a strong causal role in that. And, again, we started with 10 people on day one. And these are people that had already worked their way in and out of my life in a number of ways. And already I had learned a ton from them about how to be a good person and how to be a cooperative person. So pride probably isn't the right word there. If I were to survey over the balcony, it would be the thing that, brings me joy or gives me the most satisfaction or just lights me up. My kids like to point to the sparkle heart emoji. The thing that makes my heart sparkle, right, is the fact that it is a phenomenal group of people to work with, and to see them passionate not just about doing the day job and not just about taking care of each other as they are today, but about welcoming new people as they come in and seeing how big we can scale this particular philosophy of team building and team collaboration.
Let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
We had our fair share of early hiccups as far as technology, right? I think we all kind of have our technology missteps. I think those are kind of uninteresting if we talk about them. But I think, when it comes to team building, where we are now, I'm really excited about. I'm really proud of. I think early on, my personal biggest mistake was to be a little bit hard-headed about things. I think, I've been the team leader for a long time, right? So in a sense, I thought the transition from team leader to CEO was going to be pretty easy. And instead, it has been hard. And it's been hard for me to learn when I need to step back and say, I should not be the one making these decisions. But also, I recognize that at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to, cut the Gordian knot. I'm the one who has to say, all right, based on everybody's input, this is how we're gonna go. And usually it arrives by consensus. And very rarely is it the case that I have to kind of step in and say, okay, I know we've all expressed these things, but I'm just going to decide. But it took a little while for me to embraced the fact that I was so far out of my expertise in so many different areas like finances and things like that, that I really, really needed to rely on a group of people beyond just the immediate team. And Tim Enwall, again, multi-time CEO who came in on day one as a consultant and has since joined as the COO. Early on, he would say to me, you need to reach out to these people. You need to get connected with other CEOs because this job is isolating. You need to, talk to people who have done finance before. You need to talk to people who have run successful companies. You need to talk to people who have run failed companies. And I think that if I had really taken him at his word right at the beginning and really reached out and tried to form stronger bonds and also been a little more open even to hearing what other people on the team had to say about, you should connect with my friend so-and-so, then those first 3 to 4 months would have been much, much smoother for us. I think I, just learned the hard way. As the personal and the well-being of the company are so tied up when you're sitting in this particular chair, that I look back on that and I think, man, I might have slowed the company down by weeks or months, in my reluctance to, bring Adam Reynolds in earlier, or in my defensiveness when other people said to me, maybe you should look at product market fit a different way than the way you looked at Helm. But in the end, I think as I've learned that, and as I've learned the value of finding and building alliances with a lot of other people, and I've learned to listen better to the advice of people like Tim or the board of directors or, friends at other startups, it's helped, right? And I think I'm getting much better at it now than I was before. I mentioned that one of our core values was humility. And all of our core values we put in place not just because they were things that we felt like we had and we wanted other new people to have too. They were things that we felt were aspirational to us. I mean, I'm always going to end up talking a little bit about philosophy, but because that really is my background. But, Aristotle used to say, ethics is living up to the virtues, right? Is finding it so that you build the virtues until you build your own character until it becomes automatic for you to act virtuously. That's the way Aristotle used to talk about it, right? Humility was an aspirational goal for us and an aspirational goal for me. How am I open to other people's input? How am I continually learning? How am I not putting, my pride ahead of somebody else's input? That's one where I actually made a little bit of progress, and I'm excited to continue making progress because it ends up being a much richer experience. I end up feeling like I'm making better choices, informed choices. So that's one where I think for me personally, and in a way that impacted the company, I made some mistakes and have tried to make some adjustments, and am now kind of at least on my way toward doing it better.
Let's switch to you. Who influences the way that you work? Name a person or many persons or something that you look up to and why.
I have been very much, I can't think of another word other than blessed in life, right? I started with the story about how I got into technology, right? I just feel like I've been so fortunate to have been surrounded by people who at the right times and at the right places managed to get me oriented in an eye-opening way. Bob, the guy who was my first boss when I thought I was going to be mowing lawns and ended up, diving into technology, having somebody like him who said, you can learn and you can learn fast and this is a new emerging place. You can really do well if you apply yourself here. I worked at HP Cloud for a while, and Biri Singh, who was the VP in charge of HP Cloud, was an amazing manager, amazing VP, because he had that ability to get you rallied around a common goal and encouraged, while at the same time very specifically saying, here's where we are today and here's where we need to go. This whole kind of message of here's where we need to go and you can do it and this is how we're going to do it. And that kind of combination of laying out the analytic and really getting morale boosted is something that I learned from him, and often, very frequently look back on and say, am I that kind of person? Can I be that kind of person? Because I know how important Biri was to me when I was first cutting my teeth in the early OpenStack. More recently, Gabe Monterey, who was the CTO of Deus and then ended up, as we all moved into Microsoft, ended up leading substantial product teams inside of Microsoft. His ability to look at a landscape and say, okay, these people, these companies, these organizations might be our competitors, but they are also the people with whom, if we work together and collaborate well, we can raise the floor. right? And we can make the ecosystem better for everybody. And he was very actively engaged in that during the early container ecosystem. I don't think he got nearly enough credit for the number of times he would say, call Solomon Hykes and say, I know you vented on Twitter and you're kind of alienating people, and maybe let's go, chat with some of the people at CoreOS and see if we can mend a couple of bridges. That kind of proactive engagement in being able to look beyond competition as the overriding factor and look beyond that and say, what are the collaborative benefits, right? What good comes from us working together while acknowledging that, yes, we're still going to compete at the end of the day. And there's nothing more powerful in an open source ecosystem than having that mentality. But with Gabe, I really learned that you didn't need to confine that to within the team or within the people who are on your issue queue in your GitHub repo, but that was a characteristic or a mode of doing business, really, that you could take all the way out into the marketplace and work together with a variety of different companies. I think a lot of the perspective he took in that way is really what I'm going to be audacious, I guess, in saying this, but I really think that by his focus and the focus of a couple of other people in that early ecosystem, they set the stage for being able to build something like CNCF that has been a very positive environment going forward, right? I think they really kind of laid the foundations. And as we do this thing in the WebAssembly ecosystem, we're once again doing the same kind of thing where there are a lot of companies in the field, and they range from big companies like Microsoft to small companies like Suborbital and Cosmonic, and we're, somewhere in the middle. There's an opportunity, as I learned from Gabe, to kind of build the ecosystem now. So I think those are three people that really I find a lot of inspiration from when it comes to learning how to interact with other human beings in the technology sphere.
Okay, last question. So you're getting on a plane and you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it. They can't wait to show it off to the world. Can't wait to show it off to you right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person, having gone down this road a bit?
This is going to follow very naturally from the last question, because the advice I would really give is the advice I would just pass on from, the Bobs, Beeries, and Gabes of the world and say, don't go it alone. It's not even a matter of you don't have to go it alone. It's don't go it alone. You only harm yourself and your potential, great idea and your potential future community and audience when you insist on going it alone. Bring people in. Bring in good colleagues that you work well with. Bring in great first community members who are passionate, who get that same passion for your good idea that you have. Bring in good advisors who have walked the path before. Bring in mentors. Don't go it alone.
Fantastic advice. I love it. Well, Matt, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for telling the creation story of Fermyon.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good, all 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is Taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live, must start and file in app by 2/18.